Now that we're happy with our final master, the last stage is just to check our export settings and just a couple little maintenance things to be aware of with your tracks. So the first thing I want to look at here is just our Pro L2 settings. Now, I briefly mentioned it at the beginning of the mastering process, but eventually we're getting this track to a 24-bit WAV file. That's just kind of the industry standard for the quality of the piece of music when it's being sold or being uploaded to stores. That's just where it's going to be. So if you already have a file, a WAV file that's in 24-bit, which this file is a 44.1 24-bit, you don't really need to worry about this step as much. But basically what I'm getting at is dithering, right? So if you're an Ableton Live user or I believe Logic, even Pro Tools, you actually have the ability of exporting your stems or your stereo mix stem as a 32-bit file. So if this were a 32-bit file, we would need to dither down to 24 bits. It doesn't work the opposite way. If you're at 24, you don't go up to 32, or exporting at 32 doesn't have any effect. It's just when you go down that dithering is what you should be applying to make sure that you're not getting any weird artifacts going on. I like to just leave the dither settings at 24-bit noise shaped optimized, even if the track's already at 24, just to make sure. Now I'm going to want to increase the oversampling to 32 times with Pro L2. It's pretty CPU intensive, so I had this off the whole time, but now that we're done and we're ready to export, we can go ahead and jump that back up to 32. And then you just want to make sure that true peak limiting is engaged. That way you can have your output ceiling set to 0, and it still will prevent any peaks from going above 0. Before they had true peak limiting, it was often important to lower your output below 0 to like negative 0.2 or negative 0.3, just to make sure that you don't have any of those inner sample peaks. Once you kind of have this set here, the final thing you want to check out for is your intro and outro. Now, this track, they did a great job of just kind of automatically adding in with the bounce, the extra room needed at the beginning and the end of the track. But sometimes, you'll have a mix where at the very, very end, something will be tailing off and then all of a sudden it cuts out, or something tails off way, way too long. So I always like to kind of listen to the outro and the intro and just make sure that the mix is coming to complete 0 in a nice, pleasant way. So let's just go ahead and listen to that. And then I usually like to give it about 1-2 seconds max of just silence at the end to make sure that, when the playback happens of another song, the other song doesn't just instantly start. And I found that right about where I paused it is where I would ideally like the track to be over. And that was about a little, this little half bar too much. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that to make the WAV file the exact length I need there. And then if we kind of zoom into the intro and we just listen, it looks like, this intro, there isn't any volume, any gap of information right at the beginning. It just immediately starts. It really depends on how you feel. Sometimes producers will add just a little bit of silence at the very beginning, just to kind of make sure that there isn't any unnecessary, clicks or pops happening. But, this producer did a good job. There's really nothing happening up there at the beginning. So I'm just going to leave it as is with it starting right on the downbeat. And with that being said, now you've got your WAV file, the length of your export. So you're just going to want to click on the WAV file. In Ableton, Command-Shift-R brings up the export audio video. You can also just go to File, Export Audio Video. And you're going to want to render the master at 44.1. That's what we've been at this whole time. The only other time I see anything going on here is sometimes people record vocals and instruments at 4800, or for post, meaning for television and film, a lot of the dialogue's recorded at a higher rate, but it's eventually going to get down to 44.1 anyway. So I just prefer to always stay in 44.1 land. I really never venture away from it. If you were at 48, this would be the time to set the sample rate to 44.1. You want to make sure normalizing is off. You don't want normalizing on. That kind of defeats the purpose of your limiter and your mastering. And then you're going to want to engage the PCM encoding here, which is going to give you the opportunity to do a WAV file, an AIFF, or a FLAC. I like WAV files. There's really no difference, but that's just what I'm used to. So I'll be exporting a WAV, 24-bit, and I won't apply the dithering at this level because we already applied dithering at the limiter level, which is the last thing in the chain. So there's just really no point there. And then you can also have an MP3 here as well if you want to have an MP3 version. And I almost always bounce the MP3 and listen back to it as well, because that way you know if all of a sudden like your MP3 maybe has a little bit more distortion or anything like that, you can kind of hear that and go back and fix it. Sometimes encoding down to like an MP3 can introduce a little bit of extra added gain that we don't necessarily want all the time. Usually it's fine if you have that true peak limiting on, but it's always important to check. And then with those two things on and everything set, you can go ahead and press export and save it wherever you want.